Hello, everyone, and welcome to our program, Words Across the Water, Carnival in Writing. This is Dr. Frank Martin, Director of the IP Stanback Museum and Planetarium at South Carolina State University. And this program is part of a series of events. Oh, and we're being live streamed. This program is part of a series of events that grew out of conversations with faculty members at South Carolina State University and the mission of the IP Stanback Museum and Planetarium, which collects African and African American art or art of the African diaspora. And since the museum is located on the campus of an HBCU, we've always felt it was very important to help our students understand the importance of the cultures of the diaspora. And the co-sponsors for this program, along with the museum, would be the Department of English and Communications, especially Dr. Cassidy, who you'll see during the program, and of course, Dr. Hawes, who's the chair, and Dr. Allison McCletchie with the Department of Social Sciences. And we've got a visitor who's a canine member of the association. The program is so fascinating. It's interspecies interesting, actually. And our program is sponsored also by the South Carolina Humanities, which has provided the funding to make it possible. So this is just an example of an exhibition from the IP Stanback Museum. The exhibition was called Epiphanies, and the exhibition was concerned with how art can help have sudden insights into the diverse characters of human experience. And I jointly curated this with Janelle Logan, who is currently, I think, at the McCall Center in Charlotte. And the museum, as I said, has an extensive collection of African artifacts and African American art. And we recently had a conversation with Dr. Tolulope Filani, who is the chair of our art department at South Carolina State, who had just recently completed a beautiful sequence of bronze sculptures for a memorial on our campus. And we were talking about how Dr. Filani, as an ethnic Yoruba and as Nigerian, connects our campus through this bronze sculpture to 1,000 years of tradition of the African diaspora in bronze casting. And here we have two figures from our collection, the Ere Beji, who are twin figures that symbolize the continued spiritual presence of a twin who may be lost as part of the Yoruba spiritual tradition. And as Dr. Filani was talking, he was making it clear that traditional African art celebrates festivals and the artworks come alive, that the masking and dancing and performance are a crucial component of traditional African arts. And I know Dr. McCletchie will attest very much to her interest in this because of the traditions of Carnival, particularly in Trinidad and other parts of the African diaspora. This is also just an installation of photographs we hold in our collection from Harlem on My Mind, which includes beautiful works like this portrait of Langston Hughes, and he was just a student at Lincoln University. I'm just going to read a brief disclaimer. The ideas expressed in the program are not the opinions of the administration or officials of South Carolina State University or the officials or administration of the Stanback Museum and Planetarium or our associated institutions, but these are the considered opinions and ideas of our individual invited expert guests who are very distinguished in their respective fields, and they're speaking here as highly credentialed but private citizens. As part of our tribute to the African diasporic tradition, I wanted to cite the mutual friend I have with Dr. McCletchie, Maria Nunes, who had come to our campus and the campus of Claflin University, as well as South Carolina State University, showing images from a beautiful publication on the Carnival and celebration of Carnival in a world of their own. Here's one of the photographs of one of the Blue Devils. And I'm sure we'll hear more about the particular characters in the celebrations, but Maria's extraordinary photographs capture the spirit of Carnival and that sense of vitality and vivacity of aliveness that Carnival shows. But there's also a powerful narrative element in Carnival, and I'm sure we're going to hear much more about that this evening. And as our program moderator, we have Professor Simon Lewis of the College of Charleston. He's professor of English editor of Illuminations and expert in the literature of the African diaspora. Dr. Lewis was born in South Africa, and so this is a lifelong study for him. And I'm going to turn the program over now to Simon to introduce our very distinguished literary guests. So, Dr. Lewis?
Yes, thank you so much, Frank. Thank you very much indeed, Alison and Tom, for inviting me again to participate in Words Across the Water. This is a huge privilege for me. I've never come across Eintou or Rawle before, but looking them up, they are obviously massive figures in performing arts and public education in Trinidad, and I'm truly honored to be moderating this particular session this evening. Thanks also to all of our guests here. The way things are working tonight will be that Rawle Gibbons will speak first or perform first, and then Eintou Springer. And one of the things we've learned over the last 2 years through this COVID pandemic is that we can actually use Zoom to our own best effect, right? We can actually put questions into the chat while people are actually speaking without interrupting anybody, and then we can look at those things and use them as a very efficient way of having a Q&A after the presentations. So if you do hear anything from Rawle or Eintou as they're speaking that you want to follow up on, you can just pop something in the chat and we can come back to that in the Q&A session. So with that said, I'm going to first off introduce Rawle Gibbons, director, playwright, lecturer. He's currently head of and senior lecturer at the Center for Creative and Festival Arts at the University of the West Indies at the St. Augustine campus. He spent decades in the formal and informal study of the theatre arts, and he has a Master of Philosophy degree with research on theatrical enactments in Trinidad. The list of his publications indicates his range. They would include, for instance, a Calypso trilogy, which includes 10 to 1, I Wanna Fall, and Sing the Chorus. It also includes Towards 2002, Models for Multicultural Education, obviously a very different kind of book, and a third kind of book is a biography, No Surrender, a biography of the Growling Tiger. Beyond his work in theatre, he's written on and spoken on Pan-African aesthetics, which is obviously giving him explicit relevance to this particular series. He's looked at the Orisha tradition and its influence on popular arts in Trinidad and Tobago, and he's looked at the relevance of African religion today. His plays have won numerous awards. He delivered the prestigious Philip Sherlock Distinguished Lecturer, I beg your pardon, and in his roles as Chief Examiner on the Caribbean Examination Council and adjudicator of the Secondary Schools Drama Festival in Trinidad and Tobago, he contributes to the future development of the arts. So like Eintou, Rawle is both a performer and a writer and a public official of education, making sure that all of these traditions get passed on. So Rawle, I'll hand things over to you. You've got 15 to 18 minutes to entertain the crowd. You'll need to unmute.
All right, thank you very much, Simon, Alison and Tom, everybody who is part of this invitation to share my work. I'm happy that I'm here with my sister Eintou. We work well together over the years, and we continue to be joint soldiers in the campaign that we wage. Just one, I'm no longer at UE, just a little update there. I'm no longer at UE. I retired about, I don't know, maybe 7 years ago. I now lead another project in education called Caribbean Yard Campus, which is about community-based education. Yeah. So the work continues in a different format. I've not really been asked frequently to speak about my work. Other people do that. So I just want to give a bit of background, perhaps, to understand something about the Caribbean, where we're from, and why the work has taken the form, shape that it has. Two important factors for me One is the fact that I was born in Trinidad and in Belmont specifically. In Trinidad, Belmont is a community just off Port of Spain, the capital of Port of Spain. But what's important about that, it was the first free village established after emancipation by ex-enslaved people. That is significant because it meant that it was the home of a number of what was called liberated Africans, people who had been freed by the British from slave ships and were released in their territories. So we had people from, you had Yoruba people, you had people from Dahomey, the Rada people, and so on, settling in Belmont. So that was one important factor. Belmont, as a result of that, and because of the kinds of mixtures that we had, it wasn't only African, predominantly African, but there were Indians and there were Chinese and so on, as you would find in any Trinidadian community. Trinidad is very cosmopolitan in that way. Belmont became a center point for Carnival. And in my family, Carnival was a ritual, a coming of age ritual, a tradition, all right, led by my mother. Right? There were 7 of us, and she made sure that all of us engaged Carnival as soon as we could. So I want to establish that. Right? I grew up with Carnival. The other point I want to make that's important, I think, in terms of the work, is the fact that I entered theater in 1970, not in Trinidad, but in Jamaica. Right? My first year of undergraduate studies there. And I was thrown into it actually. I encountered theater. Theater was a big thing in Jamaica. It wasn't the same in Trinidad. In Trinidad, theater was more largely elitist, really, a middle-class activity. Okay? So we knew Carnival. We didn't know theater, really. It just didn't matter. What we had to say was said through Carnival, through Calypso, through Mass, and so on. So the significance of that 1970 introduction for me, or induction, really, is that that was the period of Black Power. The late 60s, 70s, Trinidad. So it meant that in coming into theater, you know, the view of my generation was certainly different from what had gone before. We felt that theater had to cut certain roads, had to say certain things that were not necessarily said before, had to engage people in ways that had not been done before. If theater was seen, not in Jamaica so much, because Jamaica had pantomime, which was very popular, but in the Eastern Caribbean and in Trinidad, I'm talking about, as being exclusive, then coming into it in the 70s meant that it had to be inclusive. We had to break barriers of class, barriers of race and color and all the rest of it, okay? And for me, that meant really both attention to form, what, not only content, but because the content was Caribbean already, but how do you shape a theater that reflects what we are, right, in its form? And that meant that, you know, my takeoff point was the avoidance of realism. I want to say, I picked it up from that point, but I was not the only person doing that. I inherited this as well from Dennis Scott, who wrote An Echo in the Bone, which I found out as I went along. Errol Hill, who wrote Man Better Man. All of them were trying to do different kinds of things with the form and structure of the play that more reflected our Caribbean being. So it was there. right? But that was a major concern for us. I think the other concern that came out of 1970 was the purpose of the theater, not only the form, but the function of theater. What was theater supposed to do? We felt it had to move beyond class interest. Right? It had to create consciousness. Right? It had to advocate. It had to represent. So these became, I think these two factors are what really sort of shaped the work that followed as whether as educator, as director, as playwright, you know. So that very early, we should say that one of the primary influences in the work that followed was Marina Maxwell's yard theater in Jamaica. That was also a response to 1960s and 70s, the Black Power era. Marina Maxwell was a Trinidadian woman, playwright and writer, who lived in Jamaica at the time. And she had this, what she called yard theater, okay? Which would be a celebration of the oral tradition and the popular traditions in Jamaica. All right, the conscious poets and so on would gather, drummers, dancers and so on. Everybody would come together and they would just celebrate, open the space to their work, you know. She called that the yard theater. So it ran for a number of years and then it sort of died. When I came back to Trinidad, I took the name Yard Theater because I wanted to do the same kind of thing here in Trinidad in terms of opening the space for theater. So I called my theater Yard, and Marina and I worked together when she came back to Trinidad and so on. And that concept of Yard remains central to the teaching, to the writing, and even to the project that I now do, which I call Caribbean Yard Campus. Why is it so important? Because Yard represents the nexus of all of our being, really, of our history, of our history, the history of rebellion, of the challenges that we face, and of how we see ourselves in the future. Right? All of that coalesce really in this domain that we call Yard. It is a way of celebrating tradition, ensuring that the tradition continues, as you said before, in relation to the work that myself and Eintou do. And it is also, therefore, a way of preserving the future, okay? Directing the future, preserving the past and directing the future. So Yard is very important for us, not only in Trinidad, but in the Caribbean, right? Yard means in Jamaica, home. Jamaica itself, proud Jamaicans are seen as Yard, right? And Yard in Trinidad is the way, is what is the space in which we have preserved traditions through, in the case of the African history in Trinidad, through the underground secret societies, all right, that existed even during slavery, particularly during slavery, right? And that in the post-emancipation period shaped themselves around this or within this notion of Yard. And then, of course, you know, you have Yard literature and all of that came out of being C.L.R. James and all the rest of it. But the concept of Yard, therefore, is very important. And from the Yard came Carnival. The bands, Canboulay bands, came out of the yards of Port of Spain that were divided into the French streets and the English streets, right? But each yard had its organization, its king, its queen, and its warriors, and so on. And that, of course, those yards, therefore, created not only the mass, but also the steel band. And the Calypsonians gravitated toward that as well, right? So Yard is a basic crucible, the womb, if you will, of the culture, the Creole culture of Trinidad. Right? And of course, in that yard, you got everybody mixing and so on. So that more or less shaped the thing. I said that in experimenting with form, what one did was to move away from realism. It was a counter-realist movement, okay, that we were part of. And therefore, the work, you mentioned, Simon, the Calypso trilogy, but there's another trilogy called the Love Trilogy, which is different from that Calypso trilogy, and which deals more with the form, well, not of Carnival, it deals more with the ritual forms, if you will. All right. Where the Calypso trilogy is centered on Calypso and the documentation and exploration of the different eras of Calypso and what it tells us about our society and about the Calypsonians and so on. And this other one talks more about different forms. It talks about and the university talks about Canboulay, it talks about and experiments with the use of the calendar as a dramatic form, as a structure, with ritual, our sacred ritual, Orisha, Baptist ritual, and so on. That's the kind of thing that we're dealing with in those things. So I feel it's important that we, it's important to my mind to plumb the stories, the narratives that exist within the forms that we have. All right. My own thesis is that each form, because of our history, we have secreted stories within the forms that we have. Okay, whether consciously or not. But in my mind, each form is like a chest, a treasure chest. If you open it, if you have the right key, then it reveals its stories to you, right? And that is what I try to follow, right? As against creating something and bringing it to the form, right? It's letting the form speak, right? That's what the work has been about. I think the only other thing I want to say in relation to the thing is to the work is one is that when I talk about Carnival in one of these plays, when we deal with Carnival, I just want to show the particular approach, and this is not the only Carnival thing. I'm doing Carnival work now, but I wanted to illustrate the link between Carnival and spirituality in terms of how the work shows it, right? I want to show that one, and I also want to show in this particular work. I'm going to read two brief excerpts, because in this particular work, in preparing for this, in looking at this afternoon, when I said after. Was it Simon who sent a message this morning? Thomas sent a message this morning and said, yeah, hi, it's the 24th. I said, oh yeah, it's the 24th. So I'd forgotten about that, really. But I looked at it this evening and then I discovered something about a woman. You know, I feel that I write a lot. I write about women. I write about women, right? And I want to say this. I want to read two pieces. One, this guy. This is from Ogunayan, right? Ogunayan is a play about this story of the steel band, okay? From my point of view. I try to prise open what the steel band is saying and let it speak. And this is the story that it gave me. And this guy, this character, Shaba, he's a priest, an Orisha priest in Laventil, right? And he's talking here about how he became a priest. He said, you think this work is something I did want? to carry on this Orisha feast. You think this work is something I did want? Asked for? My mother carried on, and my grandfather before she. And he comes straight from Africa and was no slave. This is the oldest shrine on the hill. He lives in Laventille Hill. None of that bothered me when I was young. I run woman, play stick. And as the Chantwell for Laku Bamboo Band, I'm making a name for myself in Kaiso. Lord Inheritor was my boast. That was his calypso name. When my mother declared that I is the one, I say she joking. 10 a week. All my brothers and sisters up in this thing. Me even interested. Besides, that year, my band bringing juju warriors with me as the chief witch doctor. So me have time for no prayer and fasting. Somebody had to be joking. The old lady say she peace and she gone. But I don't make up my mind that me ain't hearing what she had to say until Ash Wednesday. Man, Carnival Monday, I hit the road as Wakaruru, high priest of the juju. I raised my chant, ha! And that was the last thing I remember. The power spin me through the streets, back up the hill, and plant me in front of the palais. Band break up. All this people tell me. When I catch myself, big Carnival Tuesday, my eyes open, but I stare in darkness. I tell Ma, already. There's Mass, there's Carnival, and it isn't Carnival. And then, just one other, just bear with me. There's another character in this play, a woman. She's, this Shaba is blind. He's been blinded by his disobedience. This woman doesn't speak. Not that she can't. She holds a secret. And she's looking at the boys making pans. This is about the invention of pan. Pan was created by boys, young men. They were 16, 18 years old. Right? Some of them were thrown out of their homes because their families didn't want them involved with this thing. And these boys are there down in the dry river, down in what we call the dry river area, east port of Spain. And they're making these pans. And she's up there watching them. She doesn't speak. This is the first time, what she's about to say is the first time in years that anybody's heard her speak. And I'll say this about her, just so that you understand. She's a woman who has been involved a decade before in the labor riots led by Butler. All right, there were some riots. Workers rioted in 1937 and burnt, killed a policeman, and there's a lot of disturbance going on. It was a major event because these riots happened all over the Caribbean, and it brought about, one, trade unionism in the region, but more importantly, it was after a century. This was a century after emancipation. There had really been no significant change in terms of labor relations until that moment. So there's a break with the history, the post-emancipation history of the Caribbean, okay, in that period. So this woman witnessed that, she was part of it. And here she is, 10 years later, speaking for the first time. watching these boys creating the pan, making pan. And she says to them from up there, all you're able? And the fellow say, able with what, Miss Irene? She says, shh, don't talk. If they only know where it is, they will try to thief it, to out it. They still vex, you know. Butler beat them. Trouble to find him. Look how he had them from country to town. And when they do find him, it's gone. It's gone. They still vex. And they're searching. So watch out for them. Watch out for them. And they say, we're watching, Miss Irene, we're watching. And if you find what you're looking for, Miss Irene says, you think you're able? You is just boys. Any of you could carry that weight like a woman? And strong one says, I bull. I could carry anything a woman could carry. And Irene says, it ain't muscle. We just bring children. We know what it is to tote tomorrow. And when time bursts through your bones like bamboo, and the scream it brings, we know it's just the beginning. Butler was a big man when they call him. And before he, the Captain Cipriani, had class and color on his side. Maisie Prince, son, you able to put the weight of history around your neck and walk? That's the question she puts to them.
Thank you so much, Rawle. That's terrific. I see somebody else has put in the chat exactly the phrase that I picked up on, was that idea of toting tomorrow. And you'd earlier, when you were doing your whole introduction, you were talking about preserving the future before it even is there. And that's terrific. That's really, really great. You've given us a ton of things to think about already before we go on to Eintou. So thank you very, very much indeed. That's a wonderful, wonderful springboard. So moving on to Eintou Pearl Springer, though, who is an internationally recognized poet, playwright, award-winning actress, and traditional storyteller. And before we came on air, I guess we call it, I was talking to Eintou and trying to figure out which of those roles she was considering the most significant. And basically she says everything is under the umbrella of being a storyteller, whether it's poet, playwright, educator, librarian, whatever, it all comes under the idea of actually telling stories. She is a librarian. She conceptualized and developed the National Heritage Library of Trinidad and Tobago and directed it until her retirement. She's got an MPhil from City University in London. She has won all sorts of awards, including a national award, the Hummingbird Silver, for her contribution to the development of art and culture, and a Vanguard Cacique Award from the National Drama Association of Trinidad and Tobago for her contribution to the development of theatre. She speaks regularly at international fora on a wide range of issues of concern to the diaspora, which is obviously, again, why she's particularly relevant to this series of Words Across the Water. She's the first citizen of Trinidad and Tobago to have performed at the Edinburgh Festival. She's been Poet Laureate of Port of Spain between 2000 and 2009. She's published 4 volumes of adult poetry, 2 volumes of poetry and stories for children, a book on African heritage sites in Trinidad and Tobago, social studies text on the Caribbean, and Survivor, currently a recommended reading for theatre arts students, a collection of 13 plays for children and young adults. And her academic plays, academic papers and poetry have been widely anthologized. So she's incredibly broadly involved in much the same way that Rawle is. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to introduce Eintou Springer to everybody here tonight. So Eintou, over to you.
Hello, good night, everyone. Thank you for asking me to be part of this. Are you hearing me? Yes.
Yeah, we are.
It's great to be on the panel with my brother Rawle. I must say, well, I'm a storyteller, so I have to start with a story about Rawle. I was writing all these plays, and asking people to direct them, and I was never quite happy with how it turned out. So I went to the best director that we have in the region, I think, and I said to him, Rawle, I'm not happy with this. And he said, you need to trust your own voice and your own eyes. You've been in theater long enough, and I will always be there to help and guide if you need it, but you're going to be all right. So I want to start with that story about Rawle and say thanks to him. I have been all right, but I know that there's that master director's eye that I can call on anytime I feel I'm in a little bit of trouble. So thank you so much, Rawle. So Simon asked me at the beginning what I would like to be known as. I'm a storyteller, and I was born in Santa Cruz in Trinidad. Little, very, very rural village, but it had all the elements of culture in which I'm now involved. Right next to the wine shop, there was a gael. People played traditional mass. And when I say traditional mass, I have people from Venezuela, Rawle people in my family, plus in my ancestry, plus one of my grandfathers, my paternal grandfather, is Garifuna from St. Vincent. And they played the traditional Rawle mass with literally the boat, the headpiece, the boat on the head, and they would go in this zigzag fashion from Santa Cruz to 5 miles away in San Juan, which had originally been a village of the First Peoples. And so I grew up with them making their own costumes, playing this Rawle masquerade with stick fight, my aunts complaining about having to fold up all these little bits of ribbon to pin onto the candle of my uncle playing stick. So it was that kind of magical upbringing and all the stories. My mother was a great storyteller, my uncle. They all spoke Patois, that was their language. So a lot of the stories and so were told to me in Patois. So I have retained a lot of it. For them, Patois was not language couchon, but was the language that they spoke. A very powerful influence on me was my paternal grandfather, the man from Yulu, St. Vincent, the Garifuna man, who used to sing a song for me that came from the plantation yard, because he was born, he died at 106 in the 70s, but he was born on a plantation just around the end of enslavement. And he, at 3, 4, 5, I remember, before we moved out of the village, would set me on his knee and put his pipe in my mouth, to my mother's utter horror and disgust, and sing this plantation song. None to wipe my eyes, none to dry my tears, I alone in sorrow. I must go, I alone in sorrow, I must go. And he would say, me pick me, me pick me. And I think that was him obeying me into going and finding the stories and the songs. So I reference him all the time for sending me to do this work. I feel convinced that he sent me to do this work, Papa Jim P. calling. So I came out of the village and began to understand out of that sanctuary that I was poor and black with nothing to call my own, which violated what I had learned and consumed and been part of in the village. So I never accepted that version of me. And then it became very plain to me in high school, where I came to know the writings of C.L.R. James and Larry Constantine, and was a very aha moment for me. I began to understand what it meant to be African, what it meant, the process of enslavement and the psychological damage that it had done. So I leave school, I go into the library to work and meet up all this mass of information, because I was a very Black girl in a Brownian profession. I was shunted off into the Caribbean section, and there I absorbed everything. And one of the things that I absorbed was the Caribbean Quarterly of 1956, volume 4, number 3, I think it was, which talked about Carnival, and which put into context all that I had experienced in the carnivals in Santa Cruz and in the Kwesi. And then 1969, coming to England for the first time, being involved in the Black Panthers, getting to meet C.L.R. James and sit at his feet. And he was a loving mentor and friend to me, and I'm deeply grateful for that. So I come back home and I'm immediately involved in Black Power revolution. I must say though that at school, in secondary school, one of my teachers was the great Guyanese and Trini playwright, poet, and maybe the greatest Shakespearean actor to have come out of the Caribbean, Slade Hopkinson, who pulled me into theater. With him, I wrote my first script in school, and he took me into the Caribbean, the Trinidad Theater Workshop, where I learned and sat at the feet of the great Derek Walcott. 1970 comes, and I'm involved in revolution. And it is in there that I begin to understand the power of this theater thing that I was doing. We had these huge harambes all over the country, thousands and thousands and thousands of people. So I decided that I would write scripts for little performances for these things. And also, Slade had founded a group called the Caribbean Theatre Guild, and he had become ill, so I was kind of running the group. We put on a production. The leadership of the movement, because this was a revolutionary group, and you must understand that, and they didn't quite cotton on to this thing about theater and all of that having anything to do with revolution. But I was soon to convince them, because we put on this performance in the 70s in the open air in one of the squares in Port of Spain. And Rawle talked about the trade union movement and Cuba derived Butler. We put on a play with music and poetry and stuff that I was writing. I just started really to write seriously. And we did Eric Roach's poem to Butler. And we represented the burning of Charlie King, the policeman that Rawle talked about, who was killed. And by the next night, the police were raiding my house, pointing a gun up in my face and telling my mother that they had a bullet for me. So the movement said, this theater thing has possibilities. And another little experience of that, we had a very brutal police commissioner called Randy Burroughs. And I wrote a script after his men had killed one of our brethren. And when the script presented Burroughs' words, the big crowd just surged forward. We had to go on stage and push them back. So this theater thing began to be very serious. I was beginning to write more and more, but I was very unsatisfied with the goals that the movement had set and how we had achieved them. So I went back to C.L.R. James, Black Jacobins, that great book on the Haitian Revolution, in which I remember it was like one of the biggest aha moments in my life. On page 80 something, it said voodoo was the medium of conspiracy. And that led me to find my spiritual elders. Took me straight into the Orisha Yard and began a new chapter of my life of activism, using my writing skills to write papers about the spirituality, and then to make the links with Carnival. In 1969, in the Carnival of 1970 began the revolution in Trinidad. We produced a band called Pine Toppers that came from Belmont, Laventille nearby. And in the band, we represented all the heroes of the revolution. The band was Carnival then and now, Africa then and now. And in the now, we had all the heroes of revolution, Malcolm X, Che Guevara, all of these. And we went with drums alone. If the government at the time was paying any attention and had any respect for Carnival, they would have understood that the place was about to explode, because in that Carnival, we said it. So I forward now to 86 and being properly desunied, officially becoming initiated into the Ifa Orisha spirituality, and writing a lot of papers about the relevance of the spirituality in the now, and very importantly, the link between Carnival and the spirituality, the important role that Carnival, that's the spirituality, had played in the Carnival. Rawle has written brilliantly about the role of the spirituality in preserving the pan. And I have done some work on the role in the mass itself, the role in the mass. And I was part of the formation of the Emancipation Support Committee, a group that we have established the biggest festival, Pan-African festival, I think, in the world at the moment. Our emancipation celebrations are huge. So onto me fell the responsibility of writing the stuff for the emancipation procession and stuff. So I produced a play called Freedom Morning Come, which documented the first carnival, the first Emancipation Day in 1834, when the announcement was made, and discussed the role that ordinary people played, the fact that they resisted because a process of indentureship had been planned, and the people said, pas de season, they are not going to go with that. So I've written a play that documents that, and I write a lot for children as well, and I have deliberately set out to use carnival characters to bring change in the life of our children. I want to read a little bit from a play called Baby Doll Meets Midnight Rubber, in which we use Carnival characters to bring about change, because like Rawle said, we understand that theater can bring transformation. So we perform this play throughout schools, and this is, it was at a time where the AIDS care was very, very big among young people. So in this play called Baby Doll Meets Midnight Rubber, the devil character, the Blue Devil, is talking about his experience, and he said, I wasn't always so, in my day I was a player, unafraid of any danger. From in school like you, I was a party animal doo-doo. Carnival time was to dingole, make me money man break away. And I know you understand exactly what I mean to say. Them girls used to run me down, no respect for the uniform. My mother and them never worry with me. She went up north to hustle. She used to send me brands and blings and whatever else she could rustle. Well, last carnival, as usual, I was playing. Afterwards, I start with an itching man all over my body, only scratching. Then I get this nasty cough. Whatever medicine I take wasn't enough. Well, you don't know. Hi-fi was the verdict. I played so much I didn't even know where I get it. Okay, so this is just a little part of that play and an example of using carnival to transform. And the links with the carnival and the spirituality very strong in my street theater Camboulet, which actually is being performed at 5 tomorrow morning and has been on for the past 16 years. We perform it every year near the place where the Camboulet riots that gave the people the right to their celebration in 1881. So I've created a street drama in which we pay tribute to the Joe Talman and the other stickmen, African martial arts, who fought the British Constabulary and won in 1881. But in that play, we have the presence of our Orisha, we have Oshun, we have Baba Ogun, of course, the warrior, and we have the elder who prays before. So the last thing I will do, I think I'm running out of time, is to read this piece that the elder says as they congregate. And of course, it is the Miss Edna, the female, the elder, the one who calls the ancestors. In fact, she challenges the men. She says, all boy men come from between these legs. I say, raise all your boy and go bust Baker head. Baker was the head of the constabulary at the time. So she's central. She reminds them that they all come from her. And she says as she prays, we come tonight to call on a God. We God, the God of we ancestors. Because although from slavery we have freedom, we live in conditions far from human. The barricades of Port of Spain still singing humanity's bitter refrain. God, you know his people too. All we have is we Camboulet. We masquerade with sweet love way. They change with celebration from August 1st on Emancipation Day and give that day to Columbus, the very man who brings slavery upon us. We crying out against this wickedness. We praying for justice, fairness. We have a right to be celebration. Strengthen us, oh God. against this evil administration. Make us strong and terrible in battle, just like our great warrior Ogun. Clear all obstacles from our path. Let us strike fear into our enemy's heart. God of justice, God of might, be with us as we fight for our right. I think my time is up.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Eintou. That's really, really cool. And I love the way both presentations have spoken to each other. I'm hearing so much there about, for instance, the way women are the continuers of tradition, toting tomorrow in both cases, I think. So can you tell folks a little bit more about the Cambule thing that is going on? Because I suspect there may be folks who don't quite know what that's about. So can you give us a little bit more explanation on that and how that fits into Carnival generally?
Okay. Cambule reenacts, brings to life again an incident in 1881. Let me just read from the play which explains it. There were two carnivals, the Carnival of the European, before Ash Wednesday, that thing there, and then there was the Carnival of the Africans, which was in commemoration of emancipation. So Carnival for the African was Emancipation Day. We call it Cambule, which is a Kikongo word which means procession. During enslavement, our people, if there was a fire on the plantation, which most likely we ourselves had set, they would be called to go into the plantation. They would go with their chanterelles, singing their songs, with their flambeau, and so on. And then Gerard, and then let me excuse me 1 minute, see if I can.
Perhaps while Eintou's off, Rawle, one of the other things I was thinking about with both of the presentations, we had a lot of history and thinking about what was going on in the 1970s and so on. And your presentation got me thinking about Ngugi in Kenya, trying to figure out how to find a move away from that elitist kind of theater to a performance art that would work. But I see Eintou's back again. So let's maybe hold that question for a little bit later and go back to Eintou.
One of my
go for it, Eintou.
I was trying to see if he would come with a drum for me, but the young people.
That'd be very exciting. Is it going to come?
I'm not sure. I should have organized him from before, but I didn't think of it. So, so it says, what you might say is this Cambule. Watch the night sky bright with fire. Flames are dancing, the slaves they gather. Burning the canes, an act of resistance in a life of sabotage and defiance. When at last they won their freedom, the Cambule retained great symbolism. August 1st, 1838, who could forget that momentous day? Well, every year we remember the 1st of August with 3 days of celebrations, glorious. Song and dance, stick fight and love way. Man, the barricade people just have the city at bay, chanting their frustration in the calendar year. All year round, we eking out an existence. Cambule must reenact the enslavement. So the administration decided that they would stamp out this Cambule thing. So in 1877, they bring a bad police from England called Captain Baker. And in 1880, he jailed a lot of the stick men, took away, did the ultimate thing, took away their weapons, and so the next year, all the stick men who carried on the martial art tradition got together and planned for Baker. And in an historic event in 1881, the barricade people, the former enslaved people, beat Captain Baker and got a right to carry on their masquerade. But of course, the colonial government will always find a way around. So what they did is they merged the Camboulet with the Christian Carnival that was 2 days before Lent. And in an act of such horrible betrayal, gave the 1st of August and made that Columbus Day. Can you imagine that? And in the 1970s, this was one of the things that we, in our time, rioted against and forced them. Eventually, they took it back and gave it back to us for Emancipation Day. So in 1986, they removed that, and from 1987, we have been celebrating our Emancipation Day, and now Trinidad and Tobago has the largest Pan-African celebration in the world. So that is a little synopsis of a very fascinating history. Yeah. So I have been writing the plays to commemorate.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. In all of these things, so and I get back to Rawle here. What is coming out is the power of performance, right? Of words in action. And that's obviously what drama is. Theatre can be kind of staid and static, but what you're talking about and what I was referring to in Gugi's play, I Will Marry When I Want, which ended up getting him jailed because the authorities there did recognize that actually everybody was hearing the description of their lives in a language that they could understand, because he put that play on in Kikuyu rather than in English, which was the language of the theatre. And therefore it got to the people and it was really, really powerful. So Rawle, can you perhaps talk a little bit about that whole sort of sense of not just changing the form of theatre, but also perhaps thinking about the language? What language did you have to write in the 1970s in order to be producing your counter-realism and get to the people? You'd have to mute.
In the 1970s, Kamau Braffett, our poet and historian, coined a term that we all applied to the work that we were doing called nation language. And that really referred to the Creoles of the Caribbean, the Creole languages of the Caribbean, right? All of them. But it was more than just the words that he was talking about. Because if you look at Braffett's poetry, you would see that we're dealing with the resonances, with the sound. We're dealing with the ways in which the words evoke memory, emotion, and action. Yeah. So it's not just literal, right? And therefore the work becomes poetic necessarily. Yeah, you're dealing here not with, and that's what I meant about moving away from realism, right? Where because we've done that, we've had that, but the language has to do a lot more, and you can't change it. I mean, we are in the Caribbean, in the English-speaking Caribbean. That's what we speak. We speak English Creole, not English, right? But a Creole, a nation language in Jamaica, in Trinidad, all over the place, right? So you've got to work that. But it's not a question of just repeating it. The dialogue of language of the street. It's a question of finding in it the resonances, finding the ways in which it can sound us more deeply.
So here's a question. Here's a question for either of you then. what's the role of libraries in this? Because Eintou is also a library, and the library is normally a repository of written texts. But you guys are into the performance of words, and Brathwaite talks about the sonic explosions, right? When you don't just hear the words and the meaning, but you actually sort of get the sense of how it is actually shaped in the mouth. And I watched people like Jean-Dominique, and he says, Haitian Creole isn't just about the language, but it's about the it's about it's all those vocalizations that are not actually words. So
the physicality.
Yeah, exactly. So what happens with libraries? I mean, is that an appropriate way of preserving culture, preserving the futures?
Well, Eintou will come into that, but I mean, what I can see is that Eintou has transformed the library here in Trinidad, made it into a performance space.
Right.
Right. The library in itself. When Eintou was in charge of the library in Belmont, in fact, she didn't say that, but recently she has been honored by the National Library. By being given a room name. A room has been named in her honor. Put it that way.
Yeah.
A room has been named in her honor. And when she was in charge of the library in Belmont, that library was a public space. It was a performance space. People came there. You were able to meet some of the outstanding Calypsonians, storytellers, but Calypsonians, actors and so on. All of that came. She made the library into that.
Right.
So I think she did a wonderful job in terms of transforming that. I want to say something too about the question that you asked in relation to the Canboulay, her production, because what that has done is not only recounted the history for us, but she has given us, and this is the first time it happened in Trinidad, she has created an enactment, enactment of a moment. What I mean by that is that at the start of every carnival, people expect Canboulay.
Right.
This production. Right?
As a precursor.
As a precursor. Okay, as a precursor. And crowds come to it. They come every year, over and over again. So it's a ritual. Opening to Carnival. That's what she's.
I'm hearing a challenge from you guys for us here in Charleston. I mean, I know Alison and Tom are up the road in Orangeburg and Columbia, but I'm hearing a challenge for us in Charleston because we have the longest running Emancipation Day parade in Charleston. It always happens on New Year's Day. It's been running since 1866. But it's not really a carnival. I think it ought to be, right? We ought to have some real reenactments of what emancipation meant for African Americans here in Charleston and in South Carolina. I think we need to take a leaf out of your guys' book.
Well, people will do it in the ways that matter to them. I believe it's not so much the form. In our case, the form is right, this particular form, but it might be a different form in your case in Charleston. I don't know. The thing is that the question really is a question of what would you defend? That is what emancipation is about. What do you defend? Right? There's no point having a parade and if the police come, everybody runs. What do you defend? Right? So that is what Carnival means for us.
Yeah.
Last year, for instance, because of COVID, the government said there would be no Carnival. Right? And I was really interested to see how people would respond to that. So I went around, drove around on Carnival. Carnival day that there was no Carnival. But all over the place, you had little people in little pockets. They weren't breaking the law. They put on their masks. There were 6 of, the required numbers, and they had social distancing. But they were in their costumes. Being on the streets, they couldn't do that. But they were in little corners. I saw them in the streets and in the communities. That's what I mean. What would you defend? Right. And what we defend is that it's Carnival.
Right.
We will defend other things. That's
because you know what's at stake.
Yeah, you know what's at stake. You have to know.
Yeah, that's great. Do we have questions from folks in the audience? Because it's already getting it to 6:15 just about. I've seen a few comments and approving remarks. If nobody has one, I've got a really curious little question, again, related to language, and a little bit perhaps into it in related to the question of, what you call August the 1st, whether you refer to it as emancipation or whether somebody can slap a celebration of Columbus on it. So I was looking at Camboulet, and you were giving the derivation as the Kikongo word for procession, but I see that other people try to define it as can brûler. So when the day when you burned the cane, and so they're sort of linking it to a totally different thing. And I was really curious that seems to be not just a question of scholarly investigation of the etymology, but it seems to be a question of power, right? Because who are you actually ceding the power to name this thing to? And obviously you're claiming the Kikongo, you're claiming the African origin. So any comment on that?
Very much so. The official people who organize Carnival have refused to recognize the KAMBULE. They refuse. They refer to it as the French thing all the time. And we have insisted that it's KAMBULE. So now, when any discussion comes up, I said, my street theater that I put on is called KAMBULE. I don't know about the CANBOULE. My carnival did not derive from the French. I claim that. So it's a matter of perspective, it's a matter of headspace, it's a matter of orientation. And slowly and grudgingly, the ordinary people are referring to it as Camboulet, but you can see in the media, there's this confusion whether it's CAN, but we have been consistent. We have been consistent, and it has become a very moot point, that naming thing. Yeah. The colonial thing is so deep, it's so deep, it's so deep, it's so deep, because there are still lots of scholars who talk about Carnival coming from the French, despite all the information that the belly of the Carnival come out of the belly of the African, our ancestral masquerades, all of it.
It's just always curious to me that sort of denial of African origins of things. I mean, I'm not actually a linguist, but I really like the idea that okay, most common word in the English language is actually an African word, and you get all of these extraordinary sort of derivations of it coming from all correct. And I'm thinking, I don't think so. I think it's because people in Senegal used to say okay, and that's actually an African word, and we're not even acknowledging that in English. Frank has a question though about the libraries. So Frank, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question. Unmute.
Fine. Sorry, I couldn't unmute. Fantastic program. Fantastic comments from both of our speakers, but I did want to hear more from Eintou, especially about this idea of the conversion of the libraries into performance spaces to make language come alive, because we often think of the library as a place where the books are there, the texts are there. You have to search through the text and you have to read the text in quiet and silence as a kind of meditation. But this idea of the library as a space alive with culture. Eintou, would you just talk about that just a bit? Oh, well, both of you could comment on that.
Well, yes. They exiled me from the main library and sent me to a space in Belmont, which was called the West Indian Collection. And Rawle has already told you what Belmont is. So it was a most fascinating experience. I made friends with the police in the area. We brought up stick fighters. At that time, me and Rawle and some others were on the board of Queen's Hall, one of our respective cultural institutions. we introduced an institution called Vielaku, which is the old yard, the concept of the yard again. But to sum up, I started programs like, well, we launched books. I started programs like to perpetuate the old mass, like the Midnight Rubber competition, and a story again to illustrate. When I started to do Baby Doll Meets Midnight Rubber, I wanted a Midnight Rubber costume. And I was a member of the Regional Carnival Committee at the time. And I said, I need to get a Midnight Rubber costume, or they could find a Midnight Rubber to lend me one, please. And I got back a message which said, this young man is not going to lend you a costume. He wants to meet with you in person. So I said, okay, okay. And he came to the library and he said, do you remember me? I said, who are you? He said, when I was a little boy, I came to the library and I took part in a competition. And I won the Midnight Rubber competition. And you said to me that my main prize must be that I go on the road with Puggy Joseph and Commenter, two of our great Midnight Rubbers at the time. And he went on the road as part of his prize. Now he's one of the most recognized Midnight Rubbers in the country. And he brought me his costume as a gift. Isn't that a wonderful story? So that synopsizes it. As well, what we did, what I deliberately did was brought the older Calypsonians and the younger ones together. At that point, David Rudder was emerging as really fantastic. And we had the older ones like Lord Pretender and so on, who did not approve of these younger ones too much. So in cahoots with Chogdas, Hollis, Liverpool, I arranged panels which put the older ones and the younger ones together and let them talk. And, you know, at the end of it, Pretty said to me, is what we call Pretender, he's not a bad boy, he's not a bad boy. So, I mean, we had wonderful programs. We blocked the road and put on dance, some little Carib theater. And in that space, I must say, Rawle talked about the fact of the multiracial thing in our society. I started in that library to commemorate the Hussein riots of 1884. We had the introduced Ram Leela celebration, Indian Arrival Day celebrations. And from that emerged a friendship with one of Rawle's and mine's great friends, a pundit called Ravi Ji. So all of that. I don't know if Rawle mentioned something fantastic that he does, in that when he has students, and I think that is still being carried on, the students have to go to all the yards, the Ramlila yard, the First People's yard, the Ile, the yards of our African spirituality. So they are grounded in yard culture. Rawle, I don't know if you mentioned that, but I think that is a very important part of changing mindset and establishing in people's minds, in the minds of the young graduates, theater graduates, the importance of yard in the full sense of the word.
That seems like a really good link, again, either Rawle or Eintou, but Michelle has a question about intergenerational, I guess, cultural continuity and noting that we don't have too many younger folks even on this call. Michelle, do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question? No? Okay, but anyway, all right, so it's out there. How do we you know, get younger folks in and keep the ball rolling?
That's what we're doing all the time. Mm-hmm. You know, when you look at Eintou's Canberra cast, and she very consciously, very deliberately draws on young people from the same school that she mentioned, Barataria, from her community. Right? A lot of them are, you know, school people, school children, or just people who've just left school. And she draws deliberately on the disadvantaged communities. children who are giving problems and so on. You know, when she talks about transformation, that's what it is. It's not necessarily that you're going to, you know, have a big revolution and so on. It's not that. That will happen. But the starting point is really working with these individuals, you know, and changing their lives. That's the transformation that theater does. And she's doing it all the time.
Yeah.
That's the only kind of transformation you can hope for. I mean, it's you work from the ground that you stand on.
Yes.
Right? It's no point reaching for the sky if you're not standing on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
I just want to share, as Rawle says, that about 3 years ago, I was doing Camberley work in a school, and I went to rehearsal one day, and one of my students was missing. And I said, "Where is so-and-so?" And they said, "Well, he got expelled." Why did he get expelled? He wrote a letter saying to the principal that he wanted to be an assassin, and she would be the first one he would kill. And they called the police, and so I said, "Let him come back to school. Let him come back to school. I ask you as a big favor," because I'd been doing a lot of work in the school. And they brought him back, and I talked to his mother, and I brought him into my own house to stay, put him in a room downstairs. I said, "Well, my bedroom is upstairs. The door is unlocked. If you feel like killing anybody, come upstairs and kill me." And it was Carnival time, of course. I took him on the road. I took him on the truck. He met some of the great artists. That child, I mean, what a wonderful child. He's now a drummer, singer. And when I talked to this child, his family were very fundamental Christian, and they did not want him involved in all these so-called devil arts. The child wanted to drum, he wanted to sing, he wanted to perform, and they were frustrating him. And he was just lashing out. And instead of trying to understand where this child's frustration was coming from, they expelled him,
Yeah.
you know? And this, I mean, that child is such a beautiful, creative spark and energy. And that is, I mean, I have stories like that I could tell till midnight, you know?
Yeah.
And
That's
this is what Rawle is saying, the transformation must begin there with these young people, you know, and I deliberately pick out the most miserable ones, the most bad behaved ones. And the children are beautiful. I mean, I threaten them all the time. I have a boy in my hand, be disciplined or you will get one of this, and say, "Mother." And we have that, you know, the children are just beautiful. And a lot of the time they just have to have the courage to confront these parents, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I know over these various different events, we've talked a lot about the, you know, the value of poetry, the value of words, the value of the humanities in education, as opposed to just trying to sort of force people down very narrow sort of instrumentalist sort of notions of education and so on. Alison has her hand up though. So Alison, if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, go ahead.
Right. So first of all, of course, thank you to everybody for having this conversation. But I think to Bill's point about this idea of educating young people, what I got from this throughout the entire discussion is I kept coming back to that whole idea of the pedagogy of the oppressed and the pedagogy of the theater and the kind of liberation that could take place there. And you know, people who I've had this conversation with multiple people, my whole kind of concept is that in my special shiny world, we would have a education that is culturally relevant, and in the case of course, Trinidad and Tobago, using the carnival arts to teach every type of academic subject, from the natural sciences to humanities. And I think what Simon raised there with this idea of what takes place in Charleston is, in the case of us here who are in, the industrialized North, how do we remind ourselves? How do we engage with this yard that we've spent so much time paving over, right? That we don't understand that there is a yard. How do we do that? And so, there are all these kind of traditions that we no longer appreciate, understand, even sometimes acknowledge. And I want to thank the two of you because you've reminded, and I know that there are a bunch of educators in this audience. It's unfortunate that our provost left, just how important it is to be grounded in really making sure that our students receive that culturally relevant education. We're at an HBCU, and I think, or I argue all the time, that we don't teach our students enough about Blackness.
Maybe the issue is for educators that we teach. And maybe the starting point for the change should be for us to learn a different mode, right? So the question about the yards that is paved over and so on, if that is so, it means that you've got to find it. And you've got to go into a learning mode to receive that knowledge. And in a way, this is what we're trying to do with Yard Campus, the view that I'm involved with at the moment. It's about that reversal. So that when the process of education is not one of disempowerment, of removal of the things that your ancestors have left for you. Not a kind of, what is it? A kind of purification, some sort of thing that you go through and you come out, something else. It's not like that. It really ought to be that you build on the knowledges that the community cherishes, that you build on those things, right? So that the education then becomes very local. In that sense, you draw in that community. And the same way it's Carnival here, something else there in South Carolina, right? But these things become the foundation. And what the important thing about that is that it means that the person being, I don't even like to use the term educated, the person with whom you're engaging as an equal, really, because you're sharing knowledge. They're coming with something. It's not a tabula rasa. They're coming with something. You are bringing something to the table, and you meet and you talk. So in the first place, there's a kind of democracy or kind of equality in relation to knowledge, to the exchange of knowledge. And the person comes to it. You encourage that. The person comes to it with a self-confidence that what she's bringing to the table is of value. It's not something to be hidden or to be got rid of. It is of value. Bringing this and putting this on the table. And it has to be treated with respect. So a lot of the formulations that we have, that we've imbibed and so on, that's where the change has to happen. It's how we treat it. We're not teaching. You've got to start learning.
Okay. So thank you, Rawle and Eintou, and everybody. That seems like a pretty strong note to end on, formally at least. So I am going to say thank you very, very much indeed to you guys. It's been absolutely a huge privilege and an honor for me to moderate this discussion. I mean, talking to folks who've been tutored by K. Brathwaite and C.L.R. James, that's pretty cool for me, I have to say. So I'm going to hand things back to Frank Martin anyway to close things up formally.
Well, thank you all so much. This has been an extraordinary conversation, and especially Rawle's final comments, because I think that's what Dr. McCletchie was alluding to, is how can we in our academic spaces devise adequate strategies to integrate the diverse knowledges that our communities hold that will enliven and inspire our young people. So thank you all so much for this brilliant presentation. And I'm just going to close out the official part of our program. And I know that Dr. McCletchie would want me to invite everyone to stay in for the informal discussion that will follow. So Dr. Allison McCletchie is Assistant Professor of Sociology at South Carolina State University and one of the conceptualists for our program. We will have another series of the Words Across the Water programs in March and April, as well as additional programs from the museum. And we are actually planning an arts festival for April. And perhaps that will be a time we may be able to devise some strategies for incorporating some of these different kinds of knowledges to invest in our young people in our community. So with that said, I thank our production team, Dr. Thomas Cassidy, who is with the Department of English and Communications, Dr. Alice McCletchie in sociology, and here I am on behalf of the museum. And someone's echoing, I don't know. There's an open mic somewhere, close it down. The missing member is Davion Petty, as Dr. McCletchie pointed out. And here are our partners. And of course, we thank the South Carolina Humanities for the funding to make this program possible. And with that, I'm going to say good evening, and I will ask Tom to end the recorded portion of the session, and we can go into an informal discussion. Thank you.